Once again, I am Marlo Brooks, a English major senior studying English in the College of Arts and Letters here at CSUSB. I am joined by my co-host, Yvette. Say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name's Yvette Relius Powell, as always, communication major, minoring in environmental studies, and it's great to be back having this conversation with everybody. Been gone for a second.
Welcome back, Yvette. Also, we're joined by our esteemed co-host, Mr. Stan Futch.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be back, and good to see you, Yvette. And look forward to the show. I'm a community activist, and so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Glad to have you. Welcome, welcome. Once again, welcome back to Conversations on Race and Policing. The series, we have a very special episode again today for you guys. And if you haven't already, you guessed it, today is film day. We are really enjoying film days with you guys, the conversations that come from these films and these topics, the questions that are raised afterwards, the answers that come up, the conversations we're sharing with you all every week. It helps to better our attention on what we focus our fight as well. And it helps to get the audience involved in their perspective communities as well. So we thank you guys for allowing us to share these films and get the great feedback that we do get from you guys. At this time, I'm going to be passing things over to my co-host Yvette, who will shadow some recent news upon you all today.
So I've got a couple of updates for y'all. I do think you probably all heard a little bit about what's going on with Breonna Taylor and the progress that's being made. So Breonna Taylor's family has been offered a settlement of $12 million. They're calling it historic. As part of the settlement, the city agreed to housing credit programs to incentivize officers to live in the areas that they service. They agreed to use social workers to provide support on certain police runs and require commanders to review and approve search warrants before seeking judicial approval among other changes. But I'm cynic at heart. I hope y'all have enough faith for me, for everybody, that this will actually happen. You all know that those officers barged into the home when they did not have the warrant that they said they had. They said they had a no-knock warrant, which was changed to a knock and announce, meaning the criminals, we still want criminal charges, say her name, we're demanding justice for her, but we're happy to see progress being made. The next update I have is intelligence-based policing, which is being used in Pasco, Florida, to target low-income teens of colors, teens with disabilities, and teens in mental health crises. Bad news all around, I know. However, several detailed studies, including a Times report funded by USC's Fund for Journalism on Child Well-Being, have prompted nearly all other police departments with this intel to decommission the machine, the impact of which will be expansive for countless community members. This system has been used to harass and stalk citizens unprovoked. A points-based system was used against suspects and offenders, where the more interactions police brought to them, the more points they gained and the more police officers gave reason to harass them and their children. So we're just glad that this has been exposed in multiple reports and that police officers and different police organizations have been getting rid of the program as they see it is problematic. And that is all I have for updates today.
Thank you. You were truly missed. Stan, is there any recent news coming out of San Bernardino? I don't mean to put you on the spot. Any updates coming out?
Right now, there's a lot of things going on. Our biggest concern is the election. We are putting together a group of candidates that we would like to support. We're also looking at the propositions and putting a list out. It should come out pretty soon, and I hope I can get it to you so you can have it. And we're not telling you who to vote for. We're just telling you who we recommend you vote for, and you can do your own research. But this actually helps people who have problems, understanding the propositions and knowing your candidates. So it'll be out pretty soon. So that's what's going on with WAG.
Thank you for that. Yes, you are. It is election season. So let's gear up and get ready. We're going to go ahead and get started with our show today. Thank you guys for the recent news and updates. Like you always know, for those returning and for those who are new, we always start our shows off paying homage and respect to the land on which CSUSB sits on by paying our land acknowledgement. So we recognize that California State University of San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the CSUSB community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution was founded in 1965. Consistent with our values and community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationships to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold CSUSB more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. So we thank you. And that ties directly into our show, guys. We are going to get ready to start our film today. The film is titled Beyond Recognition, Women Preserving Native Culture. And without further ado, we're gonna get into our short film. See you back soon.
When I look at the Bay Area, it's always home. And when I say home, that means I was originally planted there. My ancestors have been there since the beginning of time. So I'm always home. So that's a blessing. But it's a double-edged sword. This other piece of me has to deal with seeing bulldozers pulling up street and not knowing if my ancestors are going to be there as well. And knowing that all the 425 plus burial sites of my ancestors have been destroyed because of development. When you look at this shell mound, which is the oldest one, it's covered completely by asphalt. My name is Karina Gould. I'm Chochenyo and Karkin-Ohlone. I've been working on sacred sites protection and preservation for the last 20 years of my life.
They destroyed a mound that was over 3 stories high.
Indian People Organizing for Change is a community organizing group that Karina and I started in 1999. In the beginning, it was really about teaching ourselves to stand up and make some changes in our community.
And so what we're trying to do now is create a land trust. A space where Ohlone people can come together, revitalize language and song and dance and ceremony, and talk about looking at the Bay Area in a different way, doing what our ancestors taught us to do, to take care of the land. And how do we do that with cities brought up all around us? It's about the survival of our culture and who we are. In every other way, we have been erased. This generation has to make that leap in order for us to survive. Porsche Tuhe, Ka'atla Shanka, Ka'atla Rak Grina. Yeah, say good morning. Good morning. Oh, good morning. How are you guys? Good. All right. So the language that I just talked to you guys in is called Chochenyo. Can you guys say Chochenyo? Chochenyo. Chochenyo was the very first language that was ever spoken here in Oakland. And my great-grandfather, Jose Guzman, was one of the last speakers of the language. Is that cool? Yeah. All right. Who can tell me who the very first people who lived here in Oakland were? It starts with an O, but it's not Oaklanders. Ohlone. You guys heard of that word before? Oh, okay, all right. What kind of animal lives in the shell? It starts with an A and it rhymes with ohlone.
Baloney.
Close?
Baloney.
Abalone. We lived all over the Bay Area at one time. And can you imagine Oakland had no streets? It had no buildings?
What?
Oh my gosh, at one time there was a place, Oakland, it wasn't even called Oakland, right? It was called Huchin. This is Mission San Jose, and that's in Fremont. Once my ancestors went to these missions, they couldn't speak their own languages, and they couldn't eat their own foods. It was really scary for Ohlone people a long time ago. There was particular kinds of colonization that happened to California Indians up and down the coast.
The Spanish sponsored the Catholic Church to come in and establish missions to domesticate the native people. They didn't want to get rid of them, they wanted a labor force. The way to do that is to disconnect their cultural cohesion. Native people got brought into the mission, baptized. 90% of the people died. Then the following American period where they were just interested in dead Indians so they could take the land.
And the state of California made these crazy laws which made it illegal to be Indian in California. So remember I said that our ancestors were super smart no matter where we came from?
Yes.
Okay, so my ancestors, the way they were super smart is that they pretended that they were Mexican and they lived on a ranch in Pleasanton until it was safe for us to come out again and talk about being Indian.
In the 50s and 60s, you had all these tribal groups that were destitute. People dying, starving, economic depression. And people saw that, especially during the activism that came in the 70s with Alcatraz and civil rights. So people said, we need to help these Indians do something for them. And they came up with this process.
Of the thousands of cultures that lived and continue to live here in the United States, only a fraction of those are tribes that have federal recognition status, meaning that they have a sovereign relationship with the United States. Everyone else, we don't have the same rights to protect our ancestors, the same rights to education, and the same rights to health care. Federal recognition is more than just a name, it's a whole complex system of how we navigate in the world as Native people.
It's a process that is about us. It's not by us, for us, or with us. Even one of the developers of the criteria testified in Congress to his belief that the way it's being used is racist. It has made it virtually impossible for Mission California Indians to be recognized. There's too much economics involved along the coast for a government to allow it.
I always knew who I was because my mother always told us who we were. So growing up, I've already known that I was Ohlone. I was an Indian woman on my own land, no matter what the federal government said. I really acknowledge people that are doing the recognition process and the hard work that that must entail, that is not my dream. My life's work is to do the work of the ancestors, is to recreate a place for them to come back to ensure that the culture and the practices continue on for the next 7 generations. having people realize that Ohlone people still exist has created a different way of looking at recognition.
Here in California, there's a sense that we come here in order to start over. That this is the second chance, you reinvent yourself here, you've left the past behind. And so there's much less reliance on heritage and history to give a sense of identity and place. Everywhere you live, there are always people who are keepers of the history. And once you know it, your own experience in that place is so much richer.
This was one of the very first protests that we did. Our friends came together and started protesting this mall being put on our ancient burial site. And we've been doing protests there ever since. So my son looks to be probably, I want to say 5 or 6 there. He's 19 now. People just really have come to the Bay Area not knowing what existed here prior to them being here. I think that's a real personal statement. Somebody named Sebastian, somebody's sorry.
You can go to different places in the world and you can touch those sacred places. You can go to Mexico and Egypt and you can touch those pyramids that are there. When you bring your family and friends to the Bay Area, where are those monuments of the people that were once here? Do you take them to the mall?
I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for coming out and supporting this 14th year of the Shell Mound protest. We stand here. It's a sacred site. This isn't a mall.
Everywhere I travel, I always pray at these sacred sites of our ancestors. That's why I'm here today. So I welcome you here. I hope you offer your prayer to them.
They intentionally keep us invisible because they don't want any attention raised about what they're doing to these burial grounds throughout California. I wonder how people would like it if you went into their cemetery and built a bunch of condominiums with the bodies still in place.
This is like actually on top of people?
Yes.
So you're saying right now these people that are shopping on top of people who were dead. They dug up and just took them over to Berkeley Museum.
They're still here. Some of them are still here.
Well, you know what? I'm taking this stuff back right now because that's wrong with them to do.
When you tell the story of land, even though people may not be on their traditional homelands, they may not even be from this country, but the thing is that they understand. When you start talking about land, you start talking about water, you start talking about being a part of something, people can resonate with that, and that has a real deep, deep meaning.
One of the things that you can see in any given neighborhood is 3 or 4 churches or synagogues or mosques. Where do you see those same kind of sacred places for the Ohlone people? Native people have the same right to practice their religion in the way that they want to. And that for us has always been outside in nature. We're going to Indian Canyon Storytelling Festival today. And I'm going to go tell some stories, although I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I grew up in Oakland. The world grew up around us. That has always been my village site, the village site of Huchin, where I come from. My good friend, Janella LaRose, we created an organization called Indian People Organizing for Change. and began to do sacred sites work in the Bay Area, we would get phone calls that they're pulling up my ancestors, and how do we stop that? We walked to those shell mounds for 4 years, trying to stop the bodies from coming back out of the ground. My ancestors also come from this really special place called Sigorete. April 14th, 2011, the city of Vallejo, they were actually going to bulldoze it through where my ancestors are buried. And on that day we showed up, we lit a sacred fire that lasted for 109 days. And we didn't leave that space. And I really feel like our ancestors were there. Because what happened was that people from all walks of life came, and we created a village very similar to the village that must have once been there. We left, we thought, in victory. We went back in October, and we seen the devastation of the land that had happened. And it felt like a kick in the gut. It's always hard coming back here because when we left here, the place looked a lot different than this. We just asked for really small things. The streets are lined with parking. There's no reason to put a parking lot on this land. What ended up happening was a few months after we left, they had desecrated the area that we asked them not to.
To actually be here and to actually see the land and really feel it is so sad.
We fought, and I think some people will say we lost because the Ohlone people aren't federally recognized. I think that we won, just not in the material world. This land brought us all together for a reason, to get a better idea of who we were as human beings. Sigorete was that important pivotal point in us realizing that there was a different way of doing this organizing. And I think that that's what a land trust does, that it gives us the opportunity to be recognized in a different kind of way.
Forming a land trust is always challenging. I mean, you're forming a nonprofit organization that's sole focus is land conservation or stewardship, and you can broaden it to mean cultural conservation.
I really just see like little plots of land everywhere all over the Bay Area that is sacred space, just like Sigorete. Women, as mothers, as grandmothers, we have this connection that's undeniable.
That intergenerational aspect of it matches, I think, people's relationship to place over time and the way you want it to carry forth into future generations. And there's not many legal tools that do that.
I learned so much from the young people. There's this idea sometimes that because you're older, you think you know more, but it is absolutely not true.
A land trust is a nonprofit organization focused on conservation. Citizens who are tired of waiting for public support for conserving places that are important to them raise their own funds and purchase properties in order to protect them. Generally, land trusts in the Bay Area have been used for protecting open space, protecting certain habitats or species of concern, and protecting agricultural uses. Sort of a biological focus on conservation. There's a lot of money to be raised for that. The land trust that Karina and Janella are working on is different for a number of reasons. They're going to be looking at urban areas, at sites that we typically think of as built upon, that are actually sites of a lot of deep history. This is a more cultural focus on conservation. The challenges in developing this urban, native, women-led land trust are similar to the challenges faced in general by non-federally recognized tribes in urban areas. The reason tribes are not recognized there, or one of the big reasons, is because of the extreme development of that land and the extreme value of that land. You're having to buy back your own land.
One of my other dreams to have happen is the 15,000 ancestral remains that's at UC Berkeley, and the 15,000 ancestral remains at San Francisco State will go back into our land before I die.
I'm the executive director for CILS. Why don't you come on in?
Thank you so much for meeting with me.
Sure.
We've been doing all of this work in education in the Bay Area about the remains of our ancestors being held in all of these places and the desecration of our sacred sites and all of these kinds of things. But then when you really get down to it, there's nowhere to put them.
Unrecognized tribes now can actually request repatriation of those remains. You don't have to be a federally recognized tribe in order to obtain those. So it's just another thing to think about if you're wanting to pursue those remains once you have your land. What you may need to look at is whether or not there's private ownership, which would allow a portion of their land to be utilized by the tribe.
So when we begin to re-envision as a community, what does it look like to have land? It's not just my vision, but one of the things that we can do is to begin at home.
This is liberation for all of you to be here, for all of us to be thinking about the ideas that the system that's out there is the only system that's available, because it's not.
Tiny is creating an interdependent way of living. This off-the-grid piece of land in the middle of urban Oakland where there's able to build community in a different kind of way.
Hopefulness is a poor people-led, Indigenous people-led movement. We, as poor people who've been removed and displaced and gentrified, are stewarding this land. When we started this project, the first thing we did is to ask our Ohlone brothers and sisters whether we could build here.
And there's a rooster who has an attitude.
One of the great things is that they have looked outside of themselves and brought other people in to really talk about how they're going to structure community here. Looking at those kinds of things that she's already done gives me an idea of something that's already here. So it makes me hopeful around getting the land trust really soon.
We're just going to sit down and just go around the circle. The land was taken, and that was such a deep soul wound.
You say this is what we're about.
When we talk about this land trust, it's healing for everybody. It's not just, oh, we're Native people, we're close to the land, we have this spiritual connection. Everybody has a spiritual connection, but it's been lost. You'll see these lots or old abandoned houses. You just can see the possibilities.
We can recreate a shell mound so that our ancestors be reburied at.
If a family wanted to have a ceremony for their child's naming,
bring back our languages and our songs and our dances.
People can grow their traditional foods, learn about water, learn about land.
And hopefully other places in the United States can go back to doing something similar.
As we begin to dream about what this land trust is, it's a way for us as human beings to come back to being human beings. A way for us to learn how to treat each other with respect. A way for us to re-envision the Bay Area. We can create a healing for the people that are here. Not just the Ohlone people, but all people that exist on this land.
deep shield hidden by the trees, resisting to conform to the world that blind with systems and programming ceasing birthing, giving the breeze of mental control to the prism of superior prison entrapment. Mind sent to slavery, braver than these, so we pray with degrees of earth connection. My protection, fighting till death of their infection. Even if I die, got my sons resurrecting the hidden wisdom instilled deep within them since the beginning of our history. There's no escaping the building of our escape to freedom. For now we lead them through this dense land, prepared to expand our capabilities, taking over and back what was once our ancestries. Earth and weaponry till mental telepathy breaks the frequencies that kill our higher being entities. We waiting for the stars, a message from the stars, a message from the stars that's set, ready to charge. We waiting for the stars, a message from the stars, a message from the stars that's set, ready to charge. We waiting for the stars, a message from the stars, a message from the stars that's set, ready to charge. Wait.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We just wrapped up our film screening for Beyond Recognition. My name is Daisy Ocampo. I am an assistant professor in the Department of History here at Cal State San Bernardino. I am from the Kashamo Nation, or Kashkan, and it is my pleasure today to introduce the two presenters. And to begin, we're going to go ahead and start with Odilia Romero. Odilia Romero is a Zapotec woman activist, community member. Odilia is the co-founder and executive director of Comunidades Indigenas and Liderazgo, and that is CIELO for short. Odilia is also an independent interpreter of Zapotec, Spanish, and English for Indigenous communities in Los Angeles and throughout California. She has over a decade of experience organizing Indigenous migrant communities. Ms. Romero is currently the first woman to be the binational coordinator for the Frente Indígena de Organizaciones Binacionales, so the Indigenous Front of Binational Organizations, an immigrant and human rights organization of Mexican indigenous groups. Her organizing knowledge and experience are held in high regard with multiple academic publications, awards, and lectures in universities across the United States, including Johns Hopkins, USC, and UCLA. Odilia has published on the challenges of organizing in Indigenous communities, as well as developing women's leadership and preparing a new generation of youth. Her work has also been featured in the LA Times, New York Times, Democracy Now!, and I'm aware also more recently they were featured in Vogue. So without further ado, I will go ahead and open the space for Odilia.
Padios, you would have been just cranley by Jidev Shalajo, the Jack Chejo, Bene Yeshinga. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here out in the cloud to have these conversations of the issues pertaining to our communities here in the place where we are. That's what I literally said in my language. Well, thank you for the invite. I'm very excited to be here. And, you know, I've known Daisy for a long time when she was getting her BA. Now she's a doctor. I'm like super, super happy for her. But thank you for having me here. Well, I'm gonna go back to the film, right, about land rights. For us as Indigenous people from the south of the imposed border, we're going through what our brothers and sisters went through years ago when their lands were taken away and put in a reservation. And the way I see it personally is our reservation currently are the detention centers. where our people are being put, because we cannot talk about land without talking about U.S. policy and its impact in indigenous people. I'll talk about in my state, in the case of Oaxaca. 421 mining concessions have been given to U.S. and Canadian mining company. What is that going to do? It's going to poison our lands. It's going to poison our waters. It's going to cause forced migration and displacement. And we're going to end up at the detention center where all our rights are violated, where our kids are being taken away, given in adoption, where we're going to a court that is unknown to us because we come from a communal place, and we're being judged in a world that we do not know, which is the Western Court of Law, in this case, immigration, right? So the consequences of US policy has a direct impact on land rights in our communities, be it in Oaxaca, be it in Guatemala, be it anywhere we go, we are being pushed out. But it's being very well planned that it creates a division amongst people of color, right? People are saying, well, you're Mexican and you're coming to take our jobs. No, if you see my background, that's how you wake up in my community. And I always put it up there so people know this was the land I was pushed out of. It wasn't a choice. I do not want to live in a building with 300 other people in these apartments. I do not want to live in this block where I can't breathe, I can't cross, I can't swim, I can't do anything but this block, right? So I think I want to leave that very clear for other brothers and sisters that are tuning in. We are not here by choice. We are being pushed out. A very clear example I just said is 421 mining concessions were given to US and Canadian policy. It's the same people that are attacking the tiny houses up in Vancouver. It's the same people in the Dakota pipelines, right? It's the same companies that are pushing indigenous people worldwide. And then we have to be here. We are pushed to become Latinos because our indigeneity is not acknowledged. You become Mexican, you become Latino, you become whatever they want to call you, Hispanic. But they fail to acknowledge your existence as an indigenous person, as a Zapotec, Mixtec, Chinantec, Mije. So I think I start with that, but I know this conversation is about policing and how that impacts our indigenous communities. And I believe that indigenous people, along with African American people, are in a high intensity war currently in the urban settings. We're being attacked. We are being attacked systematically. We have no access to health care. We have no access to good schools. I live in South Central. It's a food desert, you know, and that has an impact on our daily lives. Our encounter with the police, in the case of us in LAPD, has been intense. Many years ago, when we first arrived to the United States, my community in the 1980s, we had no idea what drugs were. I came here, I did not speak English, or I did not speak Spanish. And we had a lot of encounters with LAPD, and we were never able to question, ask, because we didn't speak the language. People were dropping dead for overdose, because as we arrived, the neighborhood, I'll call them the neighborhood cats, you know, we're giving the youngster drugs. And of course, they didn't speak Spanish, they didn't speak English, they didn't know what it was. And suddenly people were dropping dead. Like you have, all the community would say in Zapotec is that they're eating a balloon and they're dying. Whatever that balloon does, it creates bubbles in their mouth and they die. That was the common thing, but we didn't know it was a drug overdose. Now we know, like 40 years later, right? It was a drug. We could never get an autopsy. We could never get why were these youngsters got run over, or why we were never able to have a conversation with LAPD. And we tried for many years, but we were not successful until the killing of Manuel Jimenez, Mayan Quichean men that they shot and killed in Westlake. And there was like a bit of a protest, not as large as the Black Lives movement, because here people, the big difference is that we're afraid because many of us are undocumented, and you never know if ICE is going to be called and you're going to get deported if you create this massive protest to demand your rights, right? So that is, so there was more protests. You know, we had some people from the Black community to come and support the protest, but it didn't get the large attention. So we've, and because we've been knocking their doors for so long, they finally reached out and say, we need to have a conversation. And we said, yes, we need to have a conversation. And what we want from you is to inform yourself about the people that live in the neighborhoods that you patrol. Not everybody speaks Spanish. Not everybody's Mexican. And imagine getting into a room where there's 100 police officers and they all sit like this, right, with the guns on their side, and they do this. And one guy stood up, one officer stood up and said, I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am. There's no indigenous people in Mexico. I'm from Puebla, and I've never heard of indigenous people in Puebla. And another one stood up and said, I'm from Jalisco. There's no indigenous people in Jalisco. I'm from Michoacan. There's no indigenous people in Michoacan. And mind you, everybody with a smile and sitting like this, right? It was very intimidating because, again, like Daisy said, we are all women in the organization. So imagine being in front of this tall man, and we're very short. And we're women, like it's very intimidating to stand in front of the police. And you know, we made some advancement with this conversation. They're not the outcome we want, but we moved a few steps, very slow steps. So we've been having this, what we call the cultural awareness training for LAPD for the last 10 years. With the COVID, we didn't have one this year. Last year, you know, we were able to accomplish that. Now they carry a card asking what languages were the victim that they encounter speak. So the language has nine of the main languages that is spoken where LAPD serves. So it's with English phonetics, and they're supposed to be asking, do you speak Zapoteco? Do you speak Chinanteco? I don't know the, I guess I would say there's two people that we talked to, right? One is the high commanding officers that have been open to this conversation. And we could be very upfront and say, because it's like being politically correct, you have to talk to the Indians, right? We're very clear what the police force means and who are they there to protect. But we're also very clear that the communities, the indigenous population that do come to the US do not speak Spanish or English, and they will encounter police. Either the way Mr. Jimenez did, through a domestic violence, being victims of a crime, they will have to encounter police. And if they don't, if LAPD does not know of our existence, they minimize, or they actually have us at a zero chance of getting justice for anything, or having access to. So the cards, it was all over the newspaper. It was the biggest accomplishment, but it is fair to say that there is a rejection on behalf of many officers, right, to use it. And the high command here is like, we're gonna do this card. These guys like, well, we're gonna carry them, but we don't know if we're gonna use them. We don't, I mean, it's up to the patrol officers to use them. And we are at that debate. We cannot measure the success of those cards because we released them at the end of last year, and then COVID came along. and changed everything. So we don't know, but I do know that I've gotten calls from communities saying, hey, my son was shot and I could not communicate with the police. So I had to call the police, right? And I've gotten calls from different members of the community. So this kind of gives me an idea they're not using the card as much as we would want them to, right? But we saw that coming too, because some of the Latino cops, one specific on our last training was said, well, if you guys have so many languages, why don't you just stay home? Why do you come here? And why do I have to learn your language if you can't understand each other? And I said, well, I don't want you to learn my language. I just want you to know that there's other languages besides Spanish spoken in LA City. And there was like, they walked out on us, to be honest, like when we talk about the US policy and its impact on Indigenous community. And when we talk about the war on drugs, how we are the victims of the war on drugs as Indigenous communities, right? When we talk about that, it gets very uncomfortable, and there are times that they walked out on us, and there are times where the high commanding officer has to sit there so that this conversation flows. So I guess I think I ran out of time, I think, those are our experiences. We know what they stand for, and we know who they are to protect, but we also know the needs of the migrant communities. So we are stuck in between. It's a really hard conversation, and people that don't understand or that don't know that Indigenous people speak a different language and not every Mexican speaks Spanish, you know, has caused a lot of problems for us as community activists, because I no longer feel safe going to a protest now because some of our Mexican and our some Chicanos have said that, you know, we're working with LAPD, we should not be trusted. And it becomes a very thin line of, we are trusted by our community, and that is for us most important. But also this comes out of the racism and discrimination that Indigenous people suffer from other Latinos and Mexicans. You know, that is something that I want to close with. The racism, discrimination, and prejudice against Indigenous people by other Latinx, by other Mexicans, and by other, not all Chicanos, and not all Mexicans, and not all Latinos, is very clear. It is very clear that they think of us as a lesser person. And a lot of these backlash have to do with that. Like, why are you working with LAPD? Well, I'm not working with LAPD. I am working for a community that needs language access. I am working for a community that do encounter LAPD, that do encounter the fire department, that do encounter the paramedics. Those are the communities I work for. Like, I'll close with this. Like, during COVID, a lot of the communities have to go to the hospital. It's gotten to the point that one of the families said, you know, we had to roll the person in an office chair to the ambulance, and they just grabbed him and threw him in the ambulance. We were never able to talk to him again. The next thing they know is that he had passed away in the hospital. So with these type of attitudes, we need to be there and educating these people in these institutions, from the fire department, the police department, the ambulance company, the hospitals, the DA, the public defender, about Indigenous displacement. Otherwise, we are all labeled and lumped into Mexican, and the violation of our human rights has like really dire consequences in Indigenous communities.
Alrighty, Etienne, Odilia, thank you for your presentation, for your talk. I appreciate you, really providing that history of forced migration, right? And providing context to why that is, and definitely unpacking for us the amount of diversity that exists, quote unquote, within the singular Mexican identity. That there is so much more There isn't just Indigenous people, but even within Indigenous people, there's an array of diversity that really shapes the experience here within the US, as well as policing. So I'm gonna go ahead and segue to Stan Rodriguez. Let's see, here we have, Stan Rodriguez is from the Santa Ysabel Reservation in San Diego County, and presently is the tribal council member of the Santa Ysabel Band of the Iipay Nation. Stan is a Desert Storm veteran, and throughout the years, he has witnessed many marginalized communities struggle to have their voice heard. Stan focuses on equity and social justice by remaining active in a number of community institutions, such as Kumeyaay Community College, where he teaches the making of traditional Kumeyaay tools, the gathering and preparation of native foods, and works closely with Kumeyaay groups in both the US and in Mexico. Stan Rodriguez earned his doctorate in educational leadership through a joint doctoral program from UC San Diego and CSU San Marcos. In addition, he attended higher education as a student himself. Stan has been teaching for over 25 years. He teaches for Cuyamaca Community College, Kumeyaay Community College, Cal State San Marcos, and the University of Arizona at Tucson, as well as the Department of Defense. He has had the privilege of being invited to guest lecture in Australia, Canada, Denmark, England, Guam, Japan, Korea, Mexico, New Zealand, Poland, and South Africa, among other locations. Stan Rodriguez's academic focus centers on language loss and revitalization. He has presented to various governmental organizations and museums, such as the Smithsonian National Museum in DC, National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, and the United Nations Forum of Indigenous Rights. Stan is an activist and strives to be the voice of historically marginalized communities. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Stan.
Okay, Peña Mate Pecham. Estamos ya chuhin, ya macopa y wilconan. Pele hilicuin, ya wey weyupi, no era ni matayum. Puknachis muy yao, ni listawar. Mayum te I Peña, te Pecham. Ni listawar, mayum shmeya mat pesho. Buenas tardes a todos, mi nombre es Stan Rodríguez y yo soy Iipay Kumeyaay de Reserva Santa Ysabel, aquí en San Diego. Y ahorita son muy felices porque es cosas muy importantes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stan Rodriguez. I'm a Iipay Kumeyaay from the Santa Ysabel Reservation here in San Diego. And I just wanted to say it is an honor for me to speak on this topic. And, you know, watching that movie also, and Odilia, I really liked what you had to say about, you know, land is important. Land is important for all of our people. And, you know, when we talk about the reservations and what happened, you know, the policy of this country, or the policy of the Europeans when encroachment took place, was a policy of extermination and termination and assimilation of whoever was left. So these reservations that were created, and were used in order to sequester people, to house people, people who they wanted to subdue and keep them there. And, you know, I got to tell you, when I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and I had the opportunity of seeing the townships, they were modeled after Indian reservations. The concentration camps were modeled after Indian reservations. And, you know, you know, listening to the people who had lost their land or who had no federal recognition, you know, one of the things is like a people without a land base is like a tree without roots. You know, they're so susceptible to many different things. And here in San Diego, we have 18 different reservations. We have more reservations in San Diego than any other county in the country. and the international border has cut the Kumeyaay, our traditional area or territory in half. Half of our people are in Baja California, Mexico. Es porque yo puedo hablar español también. And one of the problems that we have, well, we have many different problems. We have many different things. We have almost 50,000 people. There was a time. This was before encroachment. And when encroachment came in, due to fighting and diseases, our numbers around 1900, 1899, 1890, 1900 were less than 1,000. Our numbers have come up to approximately 4,623. But of that number, there's approximately 41 people who still speak our language. So our language is in critical danger of going dormant. I'm not going to say extinct because we are still alive. So we have many different things that we want to that we need to address for our people. But one of the problems that we have is because our people our land has been cut in half by the international border. The Kumeyaay from Baja, when they come here to the United States, are considered foreigners. And if they come without going to the checkpoints, they're considered illegal aliens. This is our traditional territory. And we're considered illegal aliens in our own land. Our people have traditionally been marginalized by both the United States and Mexico. You know, one of the, we have reservations on this side of the border, pero en Baja California tienen los ejidos indígenas. They're like indigenous homelands. And the Mexican government, they have much control. Some of the other problems that we have is with the police system. The police come to, and one of the issues we have is with the Border Patrol. Many of you have heard about what's been going on with the border wall. It's been cutting through our traditional territory, been cutting through many of our grave sites, our cremation sites, and they don't care. They just go right through. They, you know, how many of you would like to put a place up on somebody's grave? Well, they, you know, for them to do that, for people to do that to another people, you have to dehumanize that person or dehumanize that group. Then it makes it all right to do that. You know, you've seen the military do it. You've seen many different groups do that, but it's fundamentally wrong. And as this continues, you know, we look at this, you know, monument. Well, I mean, you know, this great border wall that's put up. What is it? It's a monument to, you know, to hegemony, and it's an edifice to xenophobia. That's what it comes down to. You don't see it going across the border from Canada, so why is it happening over here? So these are some of the things that we have to, you know, deal with. And, you know, I like what you said about, you know, being labeled as a Chicana or as a Latina. You are an indigenous person, Odilia. And, you know, this is one of the things that many of the people in Mexico have to deal with that. You know, because you're born in Mexico, you're all classified as Mexicans. And that is not so. There's so much diversity when we take a look at indigenous groups. And in Baja, the different indigenous groups, and I'm talking about indigenous to Baja, such as the Kumeyaay, Iipay, Quiliwa, Cocopa, and Cochimi. They live in very small reservations, and they're always in danger of getting their land taken away. And there's also issues with narcotraficantes. You know, this is a big problem at the border. So many places, people are in danger for their lives. And on this side of the border, struggling to keep our cultural identity. We are a people that have been split in half. When we come together, we're strong. But as you split a group in half, what happens? What takes place? Through diaspora of the nation, start losing culture, start losing songs, start losing our history. And that's something we do not want to happen. When the Spaniards first came to San Diego, it was September 27, 1542. It was Juan Cabrera Rodriguez. And we have been struggling to keep our identity. And we still continue to struggle to keep our identity. And, you know, like I remember what you were saying about how these Latino police officers were saying, why did you even come? Or why don't you just speak Spanish? Why don't you just speak one language? It's the same thing that they say here in the United States. Why don't you just speak one language? In Mexico, they say just speak Spanish. In the United States, they say just speak English. Why do they want that? Because you're much more easy to control. If you lose your culture, if you lose your language, if you lose your history, it creates a void. That is, you know, when that happens, it is much easier to control you by putting something foreign into you. But what happens when you lose a sense of yourself? I mean, your tradition, your culture, who you are, that goes back to the beginning of time. So why do people want us to change? Why do they want that? It's easy to take our land. It's easy to take these things. I remember hearing the people in South Africa talk about the things that have been done to them. It paralleled so much what has happened here in these lands. And my heart went out to them. And I remember what one elder told me. If you speak your language, that is resistance. If you carry on your traditional culture, religion, that is resistance. If you sing your traditional songs and dance your traditional dances, that is resistance. And that is power. And we don't want to let that go. I won't let that go because I have not been conquered. And I will never be conquered. And I'll tell you, you know, when they were talking about the missions, you know, when the Spaniards, they militarized religion, they turned religion into a force for the military. First mission they put in California was in San Diego. 1769, our people attacked it. Then we attacked the next mission in November 5th of 1775. We burned it down, we killed the priests. We continued to resist. And we still resist today. And that resistance is not done out of hate, but it's done out of love for our people. That we do not want to give up who we are. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something, all of you. You know, when you hear people talk about, you know, we need to build an atmosphere of tolerance, just that term I find insulting. Because when we talk about tolerance, like I tolerate the inclement weather, or I tolerate a mosquito bite, or I tolerate this. But when we are grounded, firmly grounded in our culture, and we come into other, you know, are surrounded by other different cultures, and we allow that, not just allow that, but, you know, open ourselves to it. That is celebration. That is celebration of the diversity. That, you know what? You speak your language, and it's a beautiful thing you speak your language. I speak my language, it's a beautiful thing. All of you speak your own languages. And we can come and talk, and we can learn different things. And we can all grow, we become strong together because we respect each other. And I think that's something that we need to learn. That's something the police need to learn. It's hard to do that the way that they've been taught. One day, the truth will come. That's why these Columbus statues have been coming down. That's why all these statues in the South have been coming down. Because this has been a fantasy. This has been a great lie that has been taught over and over and over in the education system. And not just in the United States, but in Mexico, all over these continents. And it's time to change that. That's when we truly learn. So that's all I have right now. Thank you very much.
Yes, Stan. Yes, we have, are you gonna go ahead and ask Yvette?
Oh yeah, I would want you to go ahead and please say your statement first. I do have some questions though.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to say thank you, and I know we're gonna turn it over to Yvette and Marlo and Stan. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Stan and Odilia. Stan knows this, but our people historically helped each other during the Spanish colonization. Our trade networks, at least for my community, went all the way up north to Stan. And so there's a lot of interconnectedness and a lot of diversity before the arrival, right, of Spanish, English. So in that way, I just wanted to say thank you to both of you. And I want to turn it over to Yvette, Marlo, and I believe we have some guest commenters as well. Thank you.
So I just as well want to say thank you both for just the wealth of knowledge that you came in here with and were gracious enough to share with everybody. I had a couple of questions and maybe anyone could comment. Any of our panelists, please comment on the questions. So first, I wanted to ask you both a little bit about the goal orientation that police seem to have with your communities. And if you could speak on what their goals are for the behavior, for the violence, for the action they take in your communities, and their methods for executing those goals.
Yes.
Well, on behalf of CIELO and FIOB, I cannot speak for LAPD, right, on what are their goals. But I could speak for what are our goals. We want them to acknowledge our existence and for us to have language access rights. Two plain simple things that we want that it's been so hard to accomplish. My community has been here since the Bracero program. The massive migration came here in the 70s, 80s, and it's 40 years later that we're having this conversation with LAPD. But we're all trilingual now, at least for my community. But the newer migrants of Indigenous people, they need to know the languages that are spoken. And they need to know that they're also like the US policy and the war on drug, it is what is making us end up in the neighborhood. We don't want them to go around thinking we're here for the American dream, because there is no such thing as an American dream. The so-called American dream is a basic human right for every person on this planet, being able to access to food, housing, education, and just basic necessities. It's a human right. There's no American dream. So we want to be very clear with them of what our needs are. What are their goals? I couldn't respond to their goals.
Would you like to comment as well, Stan, Mr. Rodriguez?
My apologies, could you repeat the question?
Oh yes, I just had questions about what are the police, their goals in your communities, why do they target your communities, what are they getting out of it, or who is getting anything from the police for targeting your communities?
Okay, that's a good question. California is a 280 state, and what that means is the state has jurisdiction on the reservations. So it's different than other states where only the federal government has. Well, we have to deal with both. So with that said, our relationship with the Sheriff's Department has been ambiguous. So they pick and choose when they want to come on, when things are going, when we have something going on. Sometimes they'll come without being invited. Sometimes, we'll call them and they won't show up. So those can be problems. We have our tribal security force, and our tribal police, at least I can speak for the reservation I belong to, they have developed a fairly good relationship with the residents on the reservation. So with them, it's different. They know everybody. They come. They're culturally responsive. It's the outside sheriff's deputies. They're the ones that can be problematic, and or the highway patrol, and then the border patrol, and that's another thing altogether. The border patrol have been they've been at times difficult to work with. I remember one time I was, when I was in the Navy, I was heading to the base, I was in uniform, and I got pulled over by the Border Patrol, and they must have just got out of the academy. There were 3 vehicles, 6 agents jumped out. They came to me, and one of them, he looked like he had an attitude. He asked me, what was my citizenship? And I said, well, I'm Native American. And he got smart with me and goes, what the hell does that mean? And I just lost it on him. I told him, American effing Indian, do you effing understand that? And a lot of F-bombs I threw at him. And I said, and another thing, you want to see my green card? And he said, if you have it, I pulled out my military ID like this. And I said, get out of the way. You know, I'm in the military, you dumbass, and, you know, and I need to go. So they moved out of the way. I went to work. And I got home, my next door neighbor was Border Patrol. And he invited me to a barbecue. He said there were some new agents and he wanted me to meet them. And it was those 6 that pulled me over. And they looked at me and they looked down at their beers and I said, oh, we already met. So these are some of the problems that that I've had traditionally with them. But now since we've been protesting at the border wall, well, since those have happened, it's opened up a new relationship with them that it has been, as we say in Kumeyaay, book, it's been going back and forth. There was one time when Kumeyaay from Baja and Kumeyaay from the United States came together and we're singing our songs and dancing at the border, at a break at the border wall, and the Border Patrol didn't really know what to do. Then the Mexican military came and the Mexican equivalent of their Border Patrol came. They didn't know what to do either. So in the end, they just left us all alone. But, you know, these are some of the problems that we've had.
Thank you both so much for sharing your perspective. I did not know that California had a different relationship with your communities than the rest of the states. And I do have more questions about that, but we do have a Q&A from the audience as well. So we can go ahead and jump right into question here. Are there any ways we can actively help the indigenous communities in California and Mexico, especially those along the borders? And they want to know if that would include volunteering, fundraising, and maybe this is also a question to our staff and faculty here. They wanted to know if indigenous languages were taught here at CSUSB.
How can you help? Well, you're students and you have like your whole life ahead of you, right? And you don't necessarily have to be an activist to be able to support. Long-term support from you is wherever you go. If you become a history teacher, talk about us. If you become a social worker, advocate for us, because if you become a police officer, educate your peers, right? Whatever role you have, whatever path you decide to go in life, there's always help to acknowledge our existence as indigenous people. If you want to volunteer, there's, because you're in San Bernardino, there's an amazing organization out there doing amazing work at the border, al otro lado, help them fundraise, and research. One of my issues with academia, and Daisy knows this, and I might sound a little rough on the edges, is like, you produce so much. You study us, you study how many protests we have, what are our tactics, what are our language. But guess who has the privilege and the time to read that? Not us, because we're busy in the front lines. We're easy getting someone out of jail. We're busy getting an interpreter. We're busy educating and training our interpreters. We're busy educating the police department. We don't have the privilege to read this amazing research that you do, but you never produce their tactics for us. You never produce something that is easy for us to read and, simplify a law that will help us. You produce everything for the institutions. You produce everything. Who reads? You all get like Ford scholarship. Who's able to read that? Like always question, who's gonna read your research? It's definitely not gonna be us. One, because we don't have the time, but because you study us. Please study the ICE. Please study LAPD. How can we better that, right? Don't study us. Give us the tools to resist. Give us the tools to move forward on defending Indigenous people human rights. Don't give them the tools to continue oppressing us, because that's my biggest issue with academia. So that's how you could help. Wherever you go, acknowledge our existence and produce things that we could use on the front lines, because we are living in very rough times, but it's just gonna get worse. When they start exploring the mines in my state, we're gonna have an influx of Indigenous people from the South, right? The Northern Native people in Chihuahua have no water because the water just was given to a transnational. So they're gonna start getting here too. But we have no tools to fight this system, but they have all the tools to study and analyze us. So I think that's.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Daisy Ocampo, thank you so much for the introductions. I appreciate that. They were very well done, and we appreciate your assistance with the introductions. Odilia and Stam, fantastic information. Every time I come to these meetings, I learn so much, and just the thought that you want to be recognized for whom you are. Wow, wow, that's so powerful, because you know, we all look at who we are, and we know who we are, and we think we know who they think we are, but in your case, it's totally the opposite. You're not even identified as whom you are, and to have, there was a part there they said we had to take the role of Hispanics or Chicanos and Mexicans to keep our land and to survive. Wow, I mean, can't even be yourself to move on. How powerful is that? I mean, that's so demoralizing. And then as time went on, you were bulldozed off your land, and you were all your powers were taken away, and all your history was taken away, and malls and housing projects and right over graves. And although they knew, because you protested, they still went forward and put these malls and these hotels over your ancestors' graves, and shame on them, shame on them. I just want to say the movie was powerful, but what was so much powerful to me is what you said, and Odilia, you're right. I think it's so important that we stop studying us as a people and start studying the organizations that are coming after us, and the people that are trying to put us down. I know my wife, she's been watching this whole Black Lives Matter issue, and one of the things that she's been studying really hard is the not the police officers, but the infiltrators that are doing the dirty work for the police officers. And I think that's something that's really needs to be brought out in the whole picture of things, because it's not Black Lives Matter who are causing major problems. It's an outside source that are doing dirty works and making Black Lives Matter look so bad. And I can see that in your issue. You have these cops asking you, well, if it's so to understand your language and speak Mexican. If it's so hard for us to identify you, then be Mexican. Could you imagine having someone tell you who you should be? And I think you're right. Academia, all the students out there, Odilia said it perfectly. Stop studying me. Study those that are doing the damage to me, so I can better understand them, and so I can counter them by knowing what the laws are, what I can do to make my life better. Thank you so much, Stan and Odilia. I appreciate it.
I I did want to thank you, Stan, for commenting as well. Had a couple more questions that I did want to pose to both of you. They talked about this a little bit in the film about the value of your land and the value of your ancestors' land, and the amount of money that is put into these projects and how much is at stake for people who are stealing your land. So I wanted to know if you could just comment a little bit further for our audience about the competition for your land, which has provoked police violence, and yeah, how it is directly related to these projects and Western society making money off of it, off of the violence that occurs. So if you could speak to that.
Well, for me, my question is this: where is the Holy Land at? I've asked this question before, and I've had people say Jerusalem, Israel, the Middle East. For us, no. This is our Holy Land here. You know, from Tecate Peak, which we know as Cuchuma, Tijuana, which is a Kumeyaay name, it means by the ocean, La Jolla, Palomar, all these different places. This is in our creation story. It speaks to us. And that's why, you know, like when the border wall is coming up, it's going to our sacred mountains. It's cutting to, you know, these special spots that, you know, are important to our people. When they did the windmills, they put it on our cremation sites. They were in such a rush that they did not take a look at, you know, what they were disturbing. And that's just our cultural things. We're not even talking about the biodiversity that's impacted by that. And another thing, so, you know, the police, you know, you know, upholding the law, which, you know, that's what they say. But there's another thing that's going on. The militias, the white militias that are on the borders, we've had run-ins with them, and, you know, they're training, and, you know, they're looking for a reason to fight, and we've seen people from the militias come out and harass peaceful protesters, and we see the police doing nothing, the Border Patrol doing nothing. And I'll be honest with you. If you're seeing a bunch of Kumeyays coming out there with rifles, do you think the police would be the same way? Probably not. So these are some of the things that we have to go through. What is being, you know, what are they turning a blind eye to, and what are they, you know, what are they focusing on? And, you know, one of the other things that I see is just, you know, this whole, I mean, the way it's all set up, it's set up for people of color to lose. They want us to lose. I'm not saying we lost, but I'm saying that's what they want us to do. They want us to lose. They want to continue to oppress us and marginalize us and assimilate us. They want us to disappear. So.
Thank you, Stan. Strong words. And you know, we're a strong people. We're survivors. We will survive. We will go on, and we won't lose. I don't think we'll ever lose because we're survivors. And I think, like you said, the outside sources are the ones that scare me more than the law enforcement. Law enforcement, that they actually do certain laws, even though, you know, we can see that they don't follow them as close as they should. But the bottom line is they used to have laws. These outside agitators have no rules. And they come in and they do their damage and then they're gone. And like you said, the law enforcement don't seem to be taking them down. And so they do their damage and they're gone. And we don't know who they were. You know, if you look at the way they're dressed in these totally black hoods that come to their nose, to the top of their eyes, above their nose, top of their eyes, and all you can see is their eyes. And it's a scary thing when you see a group of, and then you're right, they come in armed. Part of the news that Ysabel was add on was, one of the things that happened was a group of African Americans bought 100 acres in this town, and I think it was Michigan, I think it was, I'm not sure. But they bought it as a safe place. And much like when they moved the Indians to the reservations, and then they came back and said, well, you guys are doing too good, this land's too valuable, let's move them again. That's what I'm so gonna be watching, these African Americans and how they survive, because I know what happened in Allensworth, I know what happened in all the different organizations that put money together and got something that were African American. They all, when they did good, the outside world came in and said, you're doing too good, we got to cut the water off, the power off, or whatever they had to do away with whatever they were doing. So I'm really interested to see the future of this commune, or whatever you want to call it. But I think it's much like the Indians. I know in Palm Springs, excuse me, they actually hopscotched the land. They did a mile, and at the point of a square, they gave, at the very point, they gave another mile. And so what would happen is they would let the Indians, when they were heading home, if they didn't step from corner to corner, they were off their reservation and they'd arrest them. What a joke, but it came back to bite them in the butt, because now what's happened in Palm Springs is the Indians own this hopscotch of land, and they are building casinos, they are leasing the land that they're not occupying, and the city's going crazy out there because they did this horrible thing to the Indians, and it's come back to bite them in the butt. So at least we have sometimes we have good outcomes, but I'm really looking forward to seeing this Black community and seeing how they survive.
It's very interesting to me, and thank you again for your contributions to the conversation. It's very interesting to me, the points that you all bring up about outside militias, outside interference, civil handling of the law. Like, that seems not legal, which you've all mentioned it is not, but even more than that is the identity of these militias, who we have identified as more so to be white community members who don't face any sort of reprimand or any punishment for their actions. And I know this is actually a long ongoing thing between outsiders who come onto First Nations communities, that it's actually pretty official in the States that they don't receive punishment for anything they do on that land. Is that true? And could you expand on that?
Which one?
If anyone could please, just please comment. It is a conversation that I have had with other professors before, other students before, about the lack of punishment that outsiders receive for their transgressions on your territory.
It really is true, because as far as arresting powers, we do not have those kind of powers. That goes back to the county, like the sheriffs or whoever. That is problematic. One of the other things that we have seen is that they pick and choose. Again, they pick and choose when they want to enforce it. And then we have people like the animal control come in and they override our police and say, oh no, this is, this person needs, one of the things about the reservation, we have animals all over, and they can push their laws on the reservation, you know, it can be problematic. It's frustrating because we are sovereign nations. I belong to a federally recognized tribe, you know, a federally recognized band, and we still have to deal with these problems. And it can be very frustrating.
Would our other panelists like to comment?
Well, for us, it's very different in the South, right? South of the imports border, there's no federal recognition of Indigenous people like it is here. We are supposedly, Mexico is multilingual, multicultural in words and propaganda, but at the end, you know, we don't, it doesn't act like as a nation state of multicultural, multilingual nation state. So I think we're talking about like the Kumeyaay brothers and sisters here and how they divide it, but the experience of being federally recognized here in the US for the Kumeyaay is very different from the Kumeyaay on south of the border, right? So, sure. And also with us, you know, in parts of indigenous regions, there's, it's militarized. Yeah. It's very different from the militia that we have that here. In the case of State of Guerrero, they're militarized. In the region of the Loxichas in Oaxaca, they are militarized, you know, so it's very, very different. We are indigenous people of the Americas, but it's very different how we are being impacted and how we are being subjected to lose our lands as indigenous people. It's a very different methodology that they have, right? Right now, for example, in our case, our biggest loss of water is to Coca-Cola. So if there's something like very simple you do, don't drink Coca-Cola, right? Because they have dried up mountains in southern Mexico, and you could Google these articles, and they do have, there is one particular article, I don't remember if it's the New York Times or, yeah, it's probably the New York Times, that talked about the drying up mountains by Coca-Cola, right? So there you see the impact of US transnational companies of pushing us out. If you have no water and people are only drinking Coca-Cola, where water becomes more expensive than a can of soda, then we have a problem, right? So I think, but again, like this is a conversation for days and hours. But I think one thing to keep in count is the south of the border indigenous people were facing different challenges. There's same challenges, same company, similar methodologies of oppression, but with the difference that, you know, there is racism, structural racism, all of that is very similar, yet the tools of oppression are very different. In our case, there's paramilitary groups, there's militarization of our communities, and with this new government who was, have brought a lot of hope to Mexico, you know, he militarized the country with love. You know, his slogan is, no habrá abrazos y no balazos, right? So there will be no bullets, just hugs. Well, I don't think that's true when it comes to land defense of indigenous people. And that there's the other thing that is being imposed is the Tren Maya, right? Or it's been sold as a development. This will bring development, it will bring fortune, it will bring jobs to indigenous communities if they allow this Tren Maya, and you could Google that, to come through their lands. But the problem is Mexico has been in development for over 500 years and we don't see it getting developed, right? It's not becoming a first world, and it's not going to become because of the corruption that exists in the country. And that is 500 years of corruption. So I think there will be no hugs and love as the communities themselves stand up to fight for against the Tren Maya, and the leaders leading the movement have been threatened in the last few months, right? Mexico has indigenous, last year, I believe, I don't have my slide with me, but I think over 29 indigenous leaders, land defenders, were killed in Mexico alone. So, being an activist and being a land defender in south of the border, just like here, it costs your life. It's
if I can add also, there's the policing at protests, there's policing back in our communities, but there's also policing, just the everyday policing. So that I think of my community, and when we would do our traditional dances on the Central Valley, I can't recall how many times they would call the police on us. Because we were loud, because we were too many people, because it went past 11 p.m. when our dances are all night long. So there's also the policing of cultural practices. And, these are things that, happen all the time, as well as I was thinking just last week, my great aunt called. She's, I guess you would call her like a Odilia, like a curandera, medicine person, right? But she works out of her garage, and she usually has a lot of people waiting for her outside of her house every morning. And I know that they called code enforcement, I believe it was the city entity, that, and she's getting sued. She's getting sued because she has an quote unquote illegal business. So part of it is that assimilation that takes place. It's also community policing you when they don't, as Odilia said, when they don't recognize your existence and who you are and your cultural being. This is what takes place. And we got to think that legally, this is how the legal institutions are set up, right? They're set up to back those people up, but not us. So I just kind of wanted to add that as well.
right. I get constant calls because some of the communities continue to have their patron saint ceremonies here. But for example, the Mayans, they still have their fire ceremony, and they're constantly calling me, hey, the LA Fire Department is here. Can you talk to them? And then I have to call the fire department. And sometimes I have to call, like when they call LAPD first, because again, they call the police first, right? For any reports. So I'm like, hey, it's a ceremony. And some of them have become like friendly and say, oh, okay, it's a ceremony. We'll talk to the fire department. But it doesn't always happen like that. What about the communities that don't know of our existence, that we could be this bridge between them, the fire department, and this institution, right? They've got incited, they've, I think the sacrifices of chickens have caused a problem in the communities. They're like, this is, even though it's a cultural practice for some communities, it's gotten them a ticket, and it's very complicated. And I mean, in my case, I live in South Central. I am surprised that the ghetto bird did not fly over us as we were talking, because my house trembles every time they're around, right? And but this is our daily dose of the helicopter sounds every day. There isn't a day that we go without hearing an LAPD helicopter in South Central, right? Events of our community have had, the LAPD has been called. There's been, I mean, they're unavoidable. That's the whole thing, right? So we have to figure out a way to educate them and acknowledge our existence. We're not always going to be successful. And the only death that we've known is the Manuel Jimenez and a Mayan one in San Francisco, where they've killed an indigenous person. But again, they could have killed a lot of more, but we don't know because we're labeled as Latinos or Mexicans, or in this case as Latino. So those are questions that we forever had. We've been here for many years, and I doubt that it's only been 2. I think it's been a lot more, but because we're Latinos, then it's really hard to distinguish. That only thing that made, I don't know if there's a list of how many people they've killed. And if it's like a Mexican indigenous person, will have like regular Latino last name. But if it's a Guatemalan indigenous person, they'll have a very different last name, or from the Yucatan Peninsula, but it's hard to access to those records, right? So we only know of 2 in the entire state of California.
So I'm gonna step in here. I did 34 years with the fire department. So I'm gonna give you a tip. When you have your ceremonies, no matter how they are, we have to be smarter than they are. And so when we have our ceremonies, one of the things we have to do is be smarter than they are. So when you get the police officers coming around, always try to make it a religious ceremony. Put some religion on it, and that changes the whole story. When you have people come into your house and you can name the person who they are, if she's a whatever her title was, give her the title and say that this is what she does. It has nothing to do with drugs or anything like that. And we need to outsmart the people that are coming after us. We need to know what they know. We need, so when the fire department comes there, if you're doing a religious thing, we will walk away. We'll make sure you're abiding by all the rules and regs with the distancing and the occupancy load, and then we'll move on. We just got to be smarter than the average bear, and that is we need to know their rules. Like you said, we need to start studying them and start studying us. And as we study them, we'll learn how to get around these obstacles. So that's one of them. And I think one of the things that I really got out of this was how we all start. And we all started, the African Americans, the Indians, most minorities started the same way. They came in, Anglos came in, Europeans came in, and the first thing they needed was a labor force. So what they do, they give us the Bible, tell us to read the Bible, and tell us that, you know, a good person works for their living, works for their food, and here you go, take this here, and you go down and cut down the weeds and clear the land and plant our food and so on. And then the second thing they do is they take the land. And it's history. It's history. Europeans have always believed that land was like gold, and so and we believe land is precious too. But they just truly believe the land is power and gold, and it is. And so what they do is they get a workforce, which is us, and then they take the land, which is our land. And so I think the history of all of this that I learn every time I hear a different group of people talk, one of the things I always find out is slavery and land. And it's a shame. It's a shame.
I had one more question, just because we are running down on time, but one more question for you all. Specifically, what stood out to me was an anecdote that was shared here about the fire ceremony and the interaction with the officers, and specifically how the particular officer that you spoke with did not end up giving you too much of a hard time, but that maybe that's not typical for you. I just want to hear you talk a little bit more, since it was spoken about the militarization of religion and the way that it has sort of taken your practices and your traditions and called them second class to theirs, and as well as their failure to acknowledge even your existence, and therefore their failure to acknowledge your tradition as well. Could you explain how that changes your interaction with officers as opposed to somebody else performing a ceremony for their traditions, which have been acknowledged? If there is a difference, if you could speak on that.
Well, I think, oh, do you hear the helicopter? I knew this was not gonna end without the helicopter. So if you feel my computer tremble, they gotten closer. But I think, you know, the thing with us I could only speak from for us from the south of the imposed border, is we're not only dealing with LAPD, there's the fire department, there is the children in services, and then there are the Mexicans, right? Because the first migration, now they are in position of power. A very clear example that I will give you is when we migrate, I migrate with my language, I migrate with my traditional regalia, I migrate with my traditional medicine. There will be someone here that practices traditional medicine, but also they migrate with their racism. That racism continues, it's passed on as a family tradition, right? So when the other Mexicans or the other Latinx end up in a position of power, I'll give you one clear example that I was a witness of as an interpreter. A woman calls me and she says, they speak Zapotec in this family in this room. I walk in, the baby's alone, and I said, but it's weird for the baby to be alone. There's usually someone in the family with them. And the woman said, what do you expect? They're Indians. That person did not make an effort for that family to get an interpreter. The next time I encountered that family was in a court of law when their children were already given to the Department of Social Services. So we have many layers because that racism has a direct impact on an Indigenous family. And this is on a hospital setting. Not to take into account with the LAPD, with the fire department, with other department, right? These persons' rights were violated because of the racism, discrimination, and prejudice of one Mexican person. I'll say Mexican because she was from northern Mexico. She did not make an effort. These kids ended up traumatized in the Department of Social Services. And the mom was being diagnosed with intellectual disability. Mom did not have intellectual disability. She was not just giving the instructions in her Indigenous language. So these are the multi-layer levels, or the, multi-layer attack on Indigenous people. And I think I'll close with that. This is like, it is the militarization that pushes out here. But when we get here, we continue to be militarized, and we continue to be, as we are labeled as Latinos or Mexicans, our rights continue to be violated here in the US. They started back home by human rights violations by taking our land. We get punished crossing the border, and we continue to get being punished and pushed to assimilation, right? So I'll end with that.
For the Kumeyaay people, or for Native people here, it wasn't until the Freedom of American Indian Religion Act was passed, August 11th, 1978, that we had the same protection as anybody else in this country, freedom of religion protection. Prior to that, our ceremonies were illegal. They were, practiced in hiding. So a lot had gone more banned, or much of that had gone dormant. So now bringing that back, reviving that has been one of our key issues. And this is why education is so important. This is why it is so important for us to develop our own educational system, to develop a pedagogy that supports culturally responsive education and decolonization. Because this has been one of the problems. I mean, our language, our religion, all these things have been seen as less than, as savage or barbarian. And they're, with the boarding schools and with all these other policies, again, they were geared for for these things to be extinguished. And when we talk about racism, I've heard that with the Mexicans, the racism that has taken place with Indians. Indians are considered like lower than dogs, and people who are Mexican, or how do you say, gente de razón, the people who only speak Spanish, they're considered up higher. And on this side of the border, it's the same thing. I was in Ramona at a grocery store, and I was talking on phone to one of my relatives. Well, there was this middle-aged white woman that came up to me. I was talking in my language. I was talking in Kumeyaay. And this white woman came up to me and she said, excuse me, sir. And I said, yes, can I help you? And she pointed at the American flag. And she said, do you know where we are? We're in America. You need to talk American. I was speaking my native language in my native land, and I had somebody with the audacity to come up to me and talk to me like that. It was beyond insulting, but that's how she learned. That is the way that she was taught in this country, and that needs to be changed. And the only way that, there's a lot of ways, part of that is through the education system. We need to re-educate people. Some people they're just not gonna, they're gonna be too resistant, but there's others that can learn. So for me, these are things that are important. And this border that we look at, again, this borders two groups that are, they're pushing, two hegemonic groups that want to push their own culture, one Spanish, one English. That is why they're fighting, to see which one is going to win. But what they're stepping on are the indigenous people. They want to just erase us all. And that's all I have to say about that.
We are coming to a close here. Thank you both